There's a weight you've been carrying that has no physical form, no measurable substance, yet it's heavier than anything you've ever held. It lives in your chest, wraps around your heart like invisible chains, pulses through your thoughts at 3 a.m. when the world is quiet and your defenses are down. You've tried to explain it to friends who look at you with concern and confusion, wondering why you can't just move on from someone who was never really yours. But how do you explain that this isn't about moving on from a person? This is about severing a connection that exists in dimensions most people never access, breaking what spiritual traditions call a soul tie, and what Carl Jung recognized as a psychic entanglement so profound that your very life force has become intertwined with someone who cannot be part of your actual life. If you've ever felt like part of your soul is living in someone else's body, if you've experienced the strange phenomenon of feeling their emotions across distance, if you've known things about them without being told, if your energy depletes when you think about them, yet you can't stop thinking about them, if you've tried everything to break free but find yourself pulled back by invisible threads that seem to exist outside of logic and willpower, then what I'm about to share will transform everything you understand about why you've been trapped and how liberation actually becomes possible for someone like you. Jung spent decades studying what he called psychic contamination, the phenomenon where two people's unconscious minds become so entangled that boundaries between self and other dissolve. He documented cases of individuals who described their experiences in spiritual language, talking about soul connections and twin flame recognition and energetic cords, and what Jung discovered was revolutionary. These weren't just metaphors or New Age fantasies. They were accurate descriptions of real psychological phenomena where two people's psyches had merged at levels deeper than conscious awareness, creating what he termed participation mystique, a fusion so complete that breaking it requires more than deciding to move on. It requires actual ritual, symbolic death and rebirth, a psychological surgery to separate what has been fused. Most people experiencing soul ties with impossible partners don't realize they're living in what Jung called a state of psychological possession. It's not that you're weak or codependent or unable to let go. It's that you've literally given pieces of your psychic energy to someone else, and they're holding parts of you that you need back to become whole. Your life force is divided, scattered, invested in someone who cannot receive it properly. And until you perform the alchemical work of reclaiming what belongs to you and releasing what belongs to them, you'll remain in this suspended state between two worlds, unable to fully inhabit your own life because so much of your essential energy is elsewhere. But here's what Jung understood that transforms this from tragedy into initiation. Soul ties with impossible partners aren't cosmic mistakes. They're psychological assignments, specific curricula your soul enrolled in to learn something that couldn't be taught any other way. The person you're entangled with appeared in your life to activate capacities within you that were dormant, to show you depths of connection you didn't know were possible, to force you into the kind of psychological work that leads to genuine individuation. The soul tie was meant to form, but it was never meant to be permanent. It was meant to be transformational. Every empath who forms soul ties with unavailable people eventually reaches a threshold moment, though most don't recognize it when it arrives. It's not dramatic or obvious. It's the moment when something deep within you, something Jung would have called the self, the organizing center of your psyche that operates beyond ego consciousness, makes a decision that your conscious mind hasn't quite caught up to yet. Your soul recognizes that this entanglement is no longer serving your evolution, that what began as awakening has become imprisonment, that the very connection that once expanded you is now constraining you. This is the moment when breaking the soul tie stops being something you think you should do and becomes something your deepest self knows must happen for you to continue growing. But knowing you need to break a soul tie and knowing how to actually do it are entirely different things. And this is where most empaths remain trapped for years, sometimes decades. You've probably tried everything the conventional world suggests. You've blocked them on social media, deleted their number, thrown away their photos, told yourself you're done 1,000 times. Maybe you've even achieved periods of physical distance, weeks or months where you don't speak or see each other, and you think you're finally free. But then something happens, a dream where they appear so vividly, you wake up feeling like they were actually there, a sudden flood of their emotions that you feel in your own body, a pull so magnetic that you find yourself reaching for your phone before your conscious mind can intervene. And you realize with crushing despair that physical separation hasn't broken anything at all, because this connection exists in spaces that physical distance cannot reach. Jung discovered that soul ties operate at what he called the archetypal level of the psyche, in territories where the personal unconscious meets the collective unconscious, where individual identity blurs into something transpersonal. This is why they feel so fated, so beyond choice, so impossible to break through willpower alone. You're not just dealing with attachment to a person. You're dealing with archetypal energies that have activated through this person, ancient patterns of union and separation, lover and beloved, seeker and found, patterns that exist in the collective unconscious of humanity and have been playing out through individual lives across centuries and cultures. The soul tie you formed with this impossible person activated what Jung called the divine syzygy, the sacred marriage archetype that lives in every psyche as the image of ultimate union, the fantasy of finding your other half, the myth of the twin flame that completes you. But here's what Jung understood that most spiritual teachers miss. This archetype isn't meant to be lived out through another person. It's meant to be integrated within yourself, the union of masculine and feminine aspects of your own psyche, the marriage of consciousness and unconsciousness, the alchemical wedding that happens inside you when projection is withdrawn and energy returns home. The person you're entangled with isn't actually your twin flame or your soulmate or your other half. They're serving as what Jung called a projection hook, someone whose qualities resonated so strongly with your unconscious contents that your psyche threw parts of itself onto them, seeing in them what you haven't yet recognized in yourself. The magnetic pull you feel toward them isn't the pull of two souls meant to be together. It's the pull of your own disowned parts calling you home, the gravitational force of your psyche trying to become whole by any means necessary, even if it means creating an entanglement with someone who cannot actually facilitate that wholeness. This realization is both devastating and liberating. Devastating because it means the connection that felt so cosmically significant, so spiritually ordained, was actually a psychological phenomenon, your own psyche using another person as a mirror and a catalyst. But liberating, because it means you're not actually losing your twin flame or betraying your soulmate by breaking the soul tie. You're reclaiming the projections that were never meant to live in someone else. You're withdrawing the energy that belongs to you. You're beginning the real work of integration that the soul tie was always trying to point you toward. If you're beginning to feel something shift inside you as you read this, if there's a part of you that's simultaneously terrified and relieved by the possibility that breaking this soul tie might actually be possible, share in the comments just one word: reclaiming. Because Jung believed that naming your intention to reclaim your energy is the first magical act in the ritual of severance, the moment when your conscious will begins aligning with your soul's deeper knowing that it's time to come home to yourself. Jung documented that breaking soul ties requires what he called symbolic action, ritual that speaks to the unconscious mind in its own language of image and metaphor and ceremony. Your logical mind can decide to move on, but your unconscious mind doesn't respond to logic. It responds to symbol, to ritual, to acts that carry archetypal weight. This is why simply deciding to be done never works for empaths with soul ties. You have to perform the breaking at the level where the tie exists, which is in the imaginal realm, the space between matter and spirit where psyche operates. The first ritual Jung would have prescribed for breaking soul ties is what he called active imagination, a process of consciously engaging with the unconscious contents that have been bound up in this entanglement. You enter a meditative state and visualize the connection between you and this person as something tangible. Some people see cords of light or energy connecting their heart to the other person's heart. Some see chains or threads or roots intertwined. Some see the two of them standing in a space filled with objects and memories and energies that belong to both. Whatever image emerges from your unconscious is the right one because it's your psyche showing you the truth of the entanglement in symbolic form. Jung found that when people could see the soul tie symbolically, they could then perform the ritual of severance at this imaginal level. You might see yourself cutting the cords with scissors made of light, or fire that burns the threads without harming either person, or simply watching the connections dissolve as you declare your intention to release what isn't yours and reclaim what is. Some people experience this as feeling pieces of themselves flowing back home, like rivers returning to their source, bringing with them all the life force they'd been channeling towards someone who couldn't receive it properly. The visualization might bring tears or anger or unexpected peace, but whatever arises is part of the alchemical process. But Jung warned that this ritual isn't a one-time event. Soul ties, especially with people who activated twin flame level recognition, don't break with a single ceremony. They require what he called ongoing individuation work, repeated acts of reclaiming projection, consistent choices to redirect energy back to yourself, daily decisions to honor the connection for what it taught you while refusing to continue feeding it with your life force. You might need to perform the severance ritual multiple times, and each time you'll go deeper, releasing layers of entanglement that couldn't be accessed in earlier attempts. The second ritual Jung prescribed involves what he called the honoring of the threshold, the conscious marking of transition from one state of being to another. In traditional cultures, initiates undergoing transformation would participate in death and rebirth ceremonies, symbolically dying to their old identity and being reborn into a new one. Breaking a soul tie requires the same ritual framework. You need to mark the ending of who you were when you were entangled and the beginning of who you're becoming as you reclaim your wholeness. This might look like writing a letter to this person that you never send, not a letter of anger or closure seeking, but a letter of release and gratitude. You acknowledge what the connection taught you, what it activated in you, what it showed you about your capacity for depth and recognition. You release them from any energetic obligations they might be carrying from your attachment. You declare your intention to withdraw all projections, to take back all the parts of yourself you gave them, to bless them on their path while choosing to walk your own. Then you perform some act of symbolic destruction with the letter, burning it and watching the smoke carry your words into the etheric realm, or burying it in the earth and letting it compost, or releasing it into water and watching it dissolve. Jung observed that these physical acts of symbolic release create shifts in the unconscious mind that mere mental decisions cannot achieve. When you watch the letter burn, your unconscious registers the finality in ways that thinking about being done never accomplishes. When you bury something in earth, your psyche recognizes the ritual of death that precedes rebirth. When you release something into water, you're engaging the archetype of dissolution and renewal that operates in your depths, whether your conscious mind understands it or not. The third ritual involves what Jung called the reclaiming of projections through shadow work. Every quality you recognized in this impossible person that made them seem so extraordinary, so essential, so irreplaceable, exists as a potential within your own psyche. The soul tie formed because you saw your own unlived possibilities reflected through them and mistook that reflection for them being your destiny. Breaking the tie requires identifying each projection and consciously working to develop those qualities within yourself. If you loved their creative freedom, your work is reclaiming your own creative expression. If you admired their emotional authenticity, your task is developing your own emotional honesty. If their spiritual depth attracted you, your path is cultivating your own spiritual practice. If their courage to be different resonated with your soul, your journey is finding your own authentic voice. Jung understood that soul ties persist as long as we're seeking in others what we haven't yet claimed in ourselves. The moment you begin embodying the qualities you projected onto them, the magnetic pull begins to weaken because you're no longer seeking outside what you're discovering inside. But Jung also identified something crucial about the shadow side of soul ties that most spiritual teachings ignore. Sometimes the person you're entangled with represents not just positive qualities you need to develop, but shadow aspects you need to integrate. Maybe they reflected back your own capacity for emotional manipulation, or avoidance of real intimacy, or addiction to intensity over sustainability, or tendency to idealize unavailable situations while dismissing available ones. The soul tie might have formed not just because of twin flame recognition, but because you were unconsciously seeking someone who would let you avoid growing in directions that terrify you. Jung called this the negative animus or negative anima projection, when the person you're entangled with represents not your higher potential, but your unlived dysfunction. Breaking this kind of soul tie requires unflinching honesty about what you were actually seeking in the impossible connection. Were you seeking genuine partnership, Or were you seeking the safety of loving someone who couldn't actually claim you? Were you seeking soul growth? Or were you seeking familiar pain that felt like home? Were you seeking your other half? Or were you seeking someone who would let you remain half rather than doing the work of becoming whole? This shadow work is brutal because it requires admitting that maybe the soul tie wasn't as spiritually elevated as you believed. Maybe it was your wounded self recognizing someone else's wounded self and mistaking trauma bonding for twin flame connection. Maybe it was two people's shadows dancing together while both called it soul recognition. This doesn't mean the connection wasn't real or profound, but it means the profundity might have been in the mirroring of unhealed patterns rather than the recognition of evolved souls. Jung discovered that empaths who can face this shadow aspect of their soul ties often experience the most complete liberation because they're not just breaking the tie with the other person. They're breaking the tie with their own patterns that created the entanglement in the first place. They're not just reclaiming energy from someone impossible. They're reclaiming energy from the parts of themselves that keep choosing impossible situations to avoid the vulnerability of available love. The fourth ritual Jung prescribed for breaking soul ties involves what he called the symbolic death of the old self, a process that empaths often resist because it feels like betrayal of the connection. But Jung understood that you cannot break a soul tie and remain the same person you were when the tie formed. The version of you that entangled with this person was operating from certain wounds, certain needs, certain unconscious patterns. That version of you has to die for the new version to be born, the version capable of healthy boundaries, sovereign love, and attraction to available partners who can actually build something real with you. This symbolic death might involve releasing not just the person, but releasing who you were with them, releasing the version of yourself that needed them to feel complete, releasing the identity you built around this connection. Some people create a ceremony where they write down all the aspects of their old self that need to die, the patterns and beliefs and behaviors that kept the soul tie alive, and they burn this list as an offering to the transformative fire. Others create a small funeral for the relationship that never was, acknowledging the death of possibility without the death of love itself. Jung found that when people could grieve fully, could acknowledge that something real is ending even though it never properly began, the soul tie would start loosening its grip. The unconscious mind needs to register loss before it can move into renewal. You cannot birth a new self without first allowing the old self to die, and most people remain trapped in soul ties because they're trying to break free while keeping one foot in their old identity, trying to sever the connection while maintaining the fantasy, trying to reclaim their energy while still hoping circumstances might change. But perhaps the most powerful ritual Jung identified for breaking soul ties is what he called the conscious creation of new attachments to the self. Energy abhors a vacuum. If you break a soul tie without redirecting that energy somewhere, it will simply flow back to the same person or find another impossible person to entangle with. Jung discovered that successful severance requires simultaneously building what he called the ego-self axis, a strong connection between your conscious awareness and your deeper self, the organizing center of your psyche that holds your authentic essence. This work involves practices that root you in your own being, that strengthen your sense of self independent of anyone else's recognition or validation, meditation that connects you to your inner stillness, creative work that expresses your authentic voice, physical practices that ground you in your body and present moment, time in nature that reminds you of your place in something larger than romantic entanglement, community connections that reflect your value back to you without conditions, spiritual practices that connect you to sources of meaning beyond human relationship. Jung observed that empaths who successfully break soul ties often report that the tie didn't break suddenly, but gradually weakened as they strengthened their connection to themselves. Each time they chose their own well-being over maintaining the energetic connection, each time they redirected obsessive thoughts toward their own creative projects, each time they felt the pull to check on this person and instead checked in with themselves, the soul tie lost power. Not because the other person became less significant, but because the empath became more solid in their own being, more rooted in their own center, more committed to their own wholeness. There's a specific moment in the process of breaking a soul tie that Jung called the crisis point, and understanding this moment can help you navigate it when it arrives. After you've performed severance rituals, after you've been doing the work of reclaiming projections, after you've been strengthening your ego self-axis, there comes a point where the soul tie fights back. It's as if the energetic connection recognizes its own dissolution and makes one final attempt to reassert itself. This is when you'll have the most vivid dreams about them. This is when you'll feel their energy most strongly. This is when they might suddenly reach out after long silence, or you'll hear news about them, or you'll have an overwhelming compulsion to make contact. Jung called this the enantiodromia, the principle that everything eventually swings to its opposite before finding balance. The dying soul tie swings to its maximum intensity right before it finally releases. Most empaths mistake this crisis point for a sign that the connection is meant to continue, that the universe is showing them they shouldn't let go. But Jung understood that this is actually the sign that your work is succeeding, that the unconscious is making one final attempt to maintain the familiar pattern before allowing transformation to complete. If you can recognize this crisis point for what it is, if you can ride through the intensity without acting on it, if you can witness the pull without giving in to it, you'll often find that the soul tie breaks with surprising completeness on the other side of this threshold. It's like a fever breaking, the moment when the illness reaches its peak right before the healing begins. You have to resist the temptation to interpret intensification as meaning. Sometimes intensity is just the death rattle of a pattern that's finally losing its power over you. Jung made a profound discovery about what happens in an empath's energy field when a soul tie finally breaks. He described it using alchemical language as the separation of what had been fused, the moment when two substances that had been combined are finally returned to their individual essence. People report feeling lighter, like a weight they'd been carrying for years suddenly lifted. They describe sudden access to energy they didn't realize they'd lost. They notice they can think more clearly, feel more present in their own life, access creativity and motivation that had been dormant. Some describe it as feeling like they can finally breathe fully for the first time since the soul tie formed. But Jung also documented something that confuses many empaths. Even after the soul tie breaks, love often remains. Not the obsessive attachment, not the energetic entanglement, not the inability to function without them, but a clean love, what he called agape. Unconditional positive regard for another soul's existence without need for connection or reciprocation. This remaining love confuses people who expect that breaking the soul tie means no longer caring, but Jung understood that mature love includes the capacity to care for someone's well-being while having no energetic attachment to them, no need to be in their life, no pull toward them whatsoever. This clean love is actually the sign that the soul tie has truly broken. When you can think of them with warmth and gratitude for what they taught you, when you can genuinely wish them well without any hidden desire for them to return, when you can remember the connection with appreciation rather than longing, when you feel neutral about whether you ever see them again, when their happiness or sadness no longer affects your energetic state, you'll know the entanglement has been dissolved, even though love in its highest form remains. The final stage of breaking a soul tie involves what Jung called integration, the conscious incorporation of everything the experience taught you without carrying the attachment forward. This is where the alchemy completes, where the ordeal transforms into wisdom, where the pain becomes medicine. You recognize that the soul tie, as painful as it was, served specific functions in your psychological development. It showed you capacities for depth you didn't know you possessed. It forced you to examine attachment patterns you'd been unconsciously repeating. It taught you the difference between recognition and relationship, between intensity and sustainability, between projection and genuine seeing. Jung found that empaths who successfully break soul ties and integrate the lessons often develop what he called relationship discernment that serves them for the rest of their lives. They can feel the beginning of energetic entanglement and make different choices. They can recognize when they're projecting and consciously withdraw the projection. They can distinguish between soul recognition that should lead to relationship and soul recognition that should remain as beautiful acknowledgement from a distance. They can feel depth with someone without needing to pursue connection. They can honor their capacity for profound recognition while protecting themselves from entanglements that would drain their life force. But Jung also discovered that breaking one major soul tie often reveals others that had been hidden underneath. Many empaths have multiple entanglements, not just with romantic impossibilities, but with family members who can't receive their love, with friends who take more than they give, with communities that use their empathic gifts without honoring their boundaries, with idealized versions of themselves that prevent them from accepting their full humanity. The work of breaking soul ties becomes a practice of ongoing individuation, repeatedly identifying where your energy is scattered and consciously choosing to bring it home. There's a beautiful paradox Jung identified about empaths who learn to break soul ties. They don't become less capable of deep connection. They become more capable of it, but in healthier forms. They don't close their hearts to protect themselves. They open their hearts more fully while maintaining energetic sovereignty. They don't stop recognizing soul-level connection when they encounter it. They simply stop mistaking recognition for relationship, stop allowing recognition to automatically create entanglement, stop giving their energy to everyone who activates something in their depths. Jung called this mature empathy, the capacity to feel with others without losing yourself in them, to recognize souls without merging with them, to love profoundly without attachment to outcome. This is what breaking soul ties ultimately teaches empaths, that you can maintain your gift for depth while protecting your energy, that you can honor connections without being consumed by them, that you can see someone's essence without needing to rescue or complete or entangle with them. If you're recognizing that you've been living with a soul tie that's draining your life force, keeping you from being fully present in your actual life, preventing you from being available for connections that could be real and sustainable, I want you to know that breaking it is possible. Not easy, but possible. The work requires commitment to ritual, to shadow integration, to strengthening your relationship with your own self. It requires grieving what never was and accepting what cannot be. It requires choosing your own wholeness over the familiar comfort of entanglement, even when entanglement is all you've known with this person. For empaths navigating this profound work of breaking soul ties, I've created something that might support your journey. It's called Your Pain Was Not in Vain, a Jungian guide to transform the pain of impossible love into self-knowledge and inner strength. It's a 30-day gentle journey specifically designed for empaths working to break energetic entanglements and reclaim their power. It includes ritual frameworks, shadow work exercises, and practices for redirecting your energy back to your own individuation process. It's not about forcing yourself to stop caring. It's about learning to care for yourself with the same depth you've been caring for someone who couldn't receive it. If you feel called to this kind of supported journey, you'll find it linked in the description below. It exists as an offering for when you're ready to choose your own wholeness. The moment you truly break a soul tie, something remarkable happens in your energy field that Jung described using alchemical language. He called it the return of the prima materia, the original substance that had been locked up in the entanglement suddenly becoming available again for your own creation. You have access to creative energy you thought you'd lost. You feel motivated to pursue dreams you'd abandoned. You notice synchronicities guiding you toward your authentic path. You attract different people, situations, and opportunities because your energy is no longer scattered in impossible directions. You're finally fully here, in your own life, in your own body, in your own becoming. But Jung warned about something crucial that every empath needs to understand. Breaking the soul tie with the impossible person is only half the work. The other half is ensuring you don't immediately create another soul tie with someone new, repeating the pattern with a different face. This requires ongoing vigilance about your attachment patterns, continued shadow work around what you're actually seeking in connection, honest examination of whether you're attracted to depth in available people or intensity in unavailable ones. Jung discovered that many empaths cycle through repeated soul ties because they mistake intensity for intimacy, projection for recognition, entanglement for love. They break free from one impossible person only to meet another who activates the same archetypal patterns, and they fall into the same dance with different choreography. The real work isn't just breaking specific soul ties. It's transforming your relationship with entanglement itself, learning to create connections based on mutual presence rather than unconscious fusion. This transformation requires what Jung called the development of conscious relationship capacity. the ability to recognize soul-level connection without automatically creating energetic entanglement. You learn to appreciate someone's essence without needing to merge with it. You learn to feel depth with someone without losing your boundaries. You learn to honor what you recognize in another while maintaining sovereignty over your own energy. This is mature love, what Jung believed represented the evolution of human relating beyond the unconscious fusion that most people mistake for profound connection. The empaths who master this capacity often describe feeling paradoxically more connected to everything while being attached to nothing. They can love deeply without energetic hooks. They can recognize souls without losing themselves. They can feel profound appreciation without need for reciprocation. They become what Jung called individuated lovers, people who have done enough inner work to love from wholeness rather than from wounds, from fullness rather than from emptiness, from conscious choice rather than from unconscious compulsion. Your journey through soul ties with impossible people wasn't a cosmic mistake or evidence of poor judgment or spiritual failure. It was exactly what your soul needed to learn something that could only be learned through that specific kind of pain. You had to feel what it was like to lose yourself in someone else, to discover the preciousness of finding yourself. You had to experience energetic entanglement to understand the freedom of sovereignty. You had to love impossibly to learn what possible love requires. The soul tie served its purpose. Now the question is whether you're ready to honor what it taught you by choosing a different path forward. If this exploration of breaking soul ties has helped you see your experience in a new light, if you're feeling the first movements toward reclaiming your energy and choosing your wholeness, if you recognize that you're ready to perform the rituals that will set you free, even though part of you is terrified of that freedom, I'd be honored to hear what you're reclaiming. Share in the comments one quality or capacity you're calling back home to yourself, because your declaration might give another empath permission to do the same. And if this journey into the psychology and spirituality of soul ties has resonated with something you're living through, please subscribe so we can continue exploring these territories together, and share this with someone who might need to know that breaking free is possible without losing their capacity for depth. Thank you for having the courage to look at the invisible chains you've been carrying. Thank you for being willing to consider that liberation might require ritual and symbol and ceremony, not just logic and willpower. Thank you for loving deeply enough that soul ties could form. And thank you for becoming conscious enough to recognize when those ties need to break, so you can reclaim your life force and redirect it toward your own becoming. Your empathic capacity for profound connection is a gift, and learning to protect that gift by breaking unhealthy entanglements is how you honor both yourself and the true nature of love itself. Until we meet again in the next exploration of what it means to love consciously while remaining sovereign.